Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories Podcast, the podcast that brings back the memories from long ago, or maybe not so long ago. But on this episode, we're going to go with the most respected opponents in Pittsburgh sports. I don't know if history, but just in general. So, as usual, I'm your host, Steve Wirt, and I'm joined with my co host.
Hi, I'm Tim Hannon.
And so, normally a good adversary will bring out the best in yourself. And, these are people and organizations. Did I say that? I don't know. Said that right. That will bring out the best. And, there's obviously like certain teams and organizations and people that the Pittsburgh sports fans probably don't respect too much. But this is not that list. This is people that and organizations that they do exist. So, without further introduction, we'll start. I'm going to go first. Notre Dame, the school there in South Bend. They play Pitt a lot. I kind of went with just the football part. They don't really have that great of a rivalry, I think, in basketball. I can't think of like any real like moments. I think we in the one basketball podcast, Pitt basketball, they had a little bit of some, but they've played each other somewhat regularly since 1909. Notre Dame does lead the series all time, 49, 21, and 1. There was a tie in there somewhere. So what were some of the moments that maybe got Pitt fans and a little fired up there was I remember this fired me up. Remember when Charlie Weis said the days of losing to Pitt in Purdue were over?
Yeah. And then Charlie days of coaching were over soon after that.
Well, that was after the first year because his first game he came and like laid it on like Pitt pretty good. Well, that was Pitt's second game. That was once that second game, technically. Well, not technically, it was his second game. And so, they lost pretty bad. And it was kind of like, well, maybe Notre Dame's back to being like really good and being perennial powerhouse that they normally are. But unfortunately, like you said, for Charlie Weis, he, you know what? It made a big difference when you don't have the cheater tapes, huh? When you don't know what plays the defense are running and actually have to call it straight up. That kind of because that guy hasn't done anything since he lost the cheater tape. So good for him. I guess better for Pitt that they beat him. I think the next 3 times. I know it was there one time I was yelling at him. Well, I'm sure he felt great shame while I yelled at him. But another great moment was Pitt. They beat the Notre Dame there in Notre Dame. And remember the triple overtime game where the sprinklers went off, like in the one overtime? The game went so long. It was like, hey, we're going to water the field in the middle of it. But nevertheless, I think that was a Pat Bostic. Pat Bostic was the quarterback that year. But and James Conner kind of had a decent game against them. He got 2 touchdowns in a game in 2014. I think that was still under Paul Chryst coached teams. So pretty good rivalry there. Not a lot of animosity because like Notre Dame fans are kind of like not jerks. And so it's hard to like really be mad at the Notre Dame fans. And for the most part, their coaches are pretty classy out. Charlie Weis was kind of the only one, like Lou Holtz, who was at Willingham, Bob Davie, who's up there now. I don't even know who's their coach now. It's some guy. Like, wasn't it their defensive coordinator last year or something? So I don't know. It's they don't really do anything that really like maybe that one time, like I remember in Notre Dame, like I think it was just literally a fan tried to call and like it was like half the Pitt roster was like doing something bad or something. It's like it's Tino Sinceri, Ray Graham. It was like so obvious that it was fake. It was pretty laughable. But besides that, I really I don't know. What do you think, Tim? Do you respect the Notre Dame Fighting Irish?
Yeah, I think like Notre Dame for some reason kind of falls into that love-hate category, and I've always kind of liked them. Yeah, I mean, hey, Rudy played for them. How can you hate him?
Rudy was offsides, which is a popular T-shirt if you go to Notre Dame games, but it really isn't that bad of a rivalry. I never thought so. It's definitely nowhere near the like level of like animosity of like a Penn State and West Virginia for sure. So
yeah, not a lot to hate. You're right. They're hard to not respect the tradition and everything that comes with Notre Dame football.
they have a great fight song too. So
They do.
yeah. So that brings us to our next thing. And Tim, I think you have this one.
Yeah. So my first respected opponent, I'm going to go with a player. I'm going to go with a controversial one, perhaps. Terrell Suggs, number 55 for the Baltimore Ravens, played for the Ravens for years and years, was involved in so many of those wars against the Steelers. And I always thought he had a lot of respect for Pittsburgh. He talked about Heinz Field being one of the toughest places to play, and he and Ben Roethlisberger exchanged jerseys, things like that. I always thought he showed a lot of reverence and respect for the rivalry. And I thought that really that era with him kind of transformed that Ravens Steelers rivalry from just this like fierce hatred to kind of this fierce mutual respect. It was very different from the days of like the late Tony Siragusa encouraging Baltimore fans to beat up the Steeler fans, or Joey Porter following the Ravens out to their bus and getting in a fight with them, right? Like that, those early days of the Steelers Ravens rivalry were marked by a lot of just hatred and mean spirited kind of stuff like that. And I feel like now the two fan bases, certainly don't like each other, don't like the team, but I just feel like there's a lot more respect. I feel like Suggs kind of ushered in that transformation. So I got to give some props to Terrell Suggs, guy I always would have loved to have on our team.
Heath Dizzle. Yeah. He's no Bart Scott. That's for I remember more Bart Scott than Terrell Suggs. I know Suggs was really good, but I don't know why I remember Bart Scott more than Terrell Suggs. Maybe just because was he the one that said can't wait? But that was when he was with the Jets.
Yeah, Bart Scott was more like in those earlier, again.
Yeah.
If you divide up that the Ravens have been around for what, 25 years or so now. If you divide up that rivalry in half, you kind of go like pre, the Harbaugh Flacco years and post the Harbaugh Flacco years, and Scott and Ray Lewis and Siragusa and Billick, Joey Porter, all those guys were like in that first part of that era. And I think, like I said, Suggs kind of was in both eras because he played for like 47 years. But I always thought he just showed a lot of reverence and respect to the rivalry. And I don't know, again, guy I just have respect for.
Yeah, it definitely, I would say the Ravens rivalry in general, like, even though the Steelers do lead the series 32 wins, the 24 losses, and it really like kind of carried over from the old Cleveland Browns. But I always thought like when they were in Cleveland, it was more like you said, a hatred. And then I remember this one time when they were feuding, like Shannon Sharp said, oh, there's a lot of, that was in 2000. There were a lot of issues in Pittsburgh. And then like, I think the Steelers beat them later that same season, and that was like their last loss. And Bill Cowher was like, yeah, we're fine over here. So that was a fun moment. Also in 2005, Sports Illustrated ranked that rivalry as number 2 on the list of top 10 new rivalries. So, and by 2015, Bleacher Report had it ranked in the number 1 rivalry, which is kind of surprising, better than Packers, because I always thought I know that's the oldest rivalry, isn't it? I think in the NFL.
Right.
Yeah. So I always thought that was more like, and then there's some pretty good one, like Cowboys, Redskins, Cowboys, Guardians, or Generals, or Commanders, Sentinels. Oh no, that's from a movie. No. I'm trying to think of what other like big rivalries that would come, like the Steelers also like had a pretty good rival with the Raiders, but it's not been consistent. and the Dolphins they had a little bit of a rivalry with, but not really as much as the Ravens. And who could forget Ray Lewis putting a bounty on Rashard Mendenhall? That I think that was, but that was still later. Was that when Suggs was on the team?
Yeah, that was the year that they won the Super Bowl. So that was '08. So that would have been the Harbaugh Flacco era. So yeah, it's not totally clean of bad people and bad acts. But again, like that was also the year they played in the AFC Championship game. And, that game was just brutal. And I felt like that was another one where you just had to respect both teams, and they respected each other. And I don't know, it wasn't the hatred that it would have been a few years earlier, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and it's just like you said, the bounties on Hines Ward, and actually Terrell Suggs was quoted as that there was a bounty put out, but
he was the one
that said it was a joke. It's like, we're just kidding.
He was the one that unfortunately said it out loud.
Yeah,
but then the NFL didn't care because it wasn't Brett Favre.
Yeah. All right, Tim, who do you got next?
Okay, I'm going to go with another AFC North rival. I'm going to go with the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton.
Andy Dalton. That's tough, like to separate him from. That's an interesting nuance there. I like how you separated him from the Bengals of that era, because I totally don't respect any of those other Bengals.
And that's really the conundrum with Andy Dalton, because he's the guy that piloted all those Vontaze Burfict, Pac-Man Jones era Bengals, where they had these just horrific games with the Steelers where people were getting maimed and killed and paralyzed and everything else, and beer bottles thrown at Ben as he's being carted off the field. It was just a nasty, ugly, awful thing to watch there for about 4 or 5 years. But Andy Dalton really I always thought kind of rose above that. And off the field, he's a really good dude. He and his wife have a foundation that supports ill and physically challenged kids. Probably one of the most famous moments of his career, ironically, was when he beat the Ravens in the last game of the season to put the Buffalo Bills into the playoffs. And Buffalo fans ended up donating over $400,000 to his charity. Do you remember that, Steve?
Yeah, I forgot that was the Bengals. I thought that was another team, but I remember watching that game. I remember that, like, Baltimore fell apart at the end of that game. Yeah,
because it was like a 4th and 20.
They had to. That was a game they had to win. Yeah, because that's right. Because they put Buffalo in the playoff, and I remember that people like the Buffalo fans donated like a bunch of money to his charity. Yeah, it was.
And it was a cool act.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. Yeah,
it actually spawned a bunch of copycat actions. In 2021, when Daniel Carlson, the kicker for the Raiders, kicked an overtime field goal to put the Steelers into the playoffs to beat the Chargers, there were a bunch of Steeler fans that donated to his charity. So, that was sort of a thing that happened, repeatedly, because, and it all started with Andy Dalton and the Buffalo fans. So just a good guy. And, like, again, hard to hate. I mean, very, very played for that awful, disgusting excuse for a team, kind of had a face that was punchable, but I don't know, just hard guy to dislike.
I can't argue with that one. The punchable face. I don't know if I'd go around punching Andy Dalton. He looks like he could kick my butt. But hey, that's just me, Tim. Feel free. Your results may vary, I guess.
No, I will totally sit here behind my microphone and talk big instead.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go with the Indianapolis Colts, and just a little background there. The Steelers actually lead this series against the Colts, 26 wins to 6 losses, and that goes believe it or not, that goes back to the Baltimore days in the 50s, if you believe. Like, so that's wild that, like, Baltimore was really good in the 50s, weren't they, with Johnny Unitas and all those other guys? They had a good defense too. So some feud moments. Remember in 2005, we probably went over this on our podcast of that Super Bowl 40. Joey Porter called the Colts soft. So that probably wasn't as good. He said they just don't want to sit there and line up and play football. They want to try and catch you off guard. They don't want to play smash mouth football. They want to trick you. They want to catch you substituting. So he was definitely critical of how Peyton Manning managed the game. Also, like another great moment in that season, I remember Mike Vanderjagt laughed at Bill Cowher after he called a timeout to freeze him. So,
Oops.
but yeah, that didn't work out too well for the West Virginia alum there. The good moments, they beat the Colts in that same playoff game that year after Jerry Pollock. They backed up Joey Porter's talk, and why are they respected? I think it's because of the people like the Johnny Unitas, like I said. They've had a lot of like who was their tight end? The John Mackey, Tony Dungy, coach there, Peyton Manning. Like they've always seemed like I think their owner's kind of a goofball, like because it's still the owner's son is the one. No, that was Carol Rosenblum who moved them, huh?
No, it was Irsay. It was the Irsays. You're right.
It was the Irsay?
Same family. Yep.
Yeah, they're just goofballs, but they seem to run like a decent organization, and they always seem to like I don't know. They never seem like, and their fans never seem to be jerks and stuff, and like even their announcers, like when they lost like that game in '95, like the Hail Mary that fell short there, pretty complimentary of the Steelers, and there's complimentary of the Steelers when they beat them, in that playoff game, and that had to be pretty disappointing because, they were trying to win Tony Dungy a Super Bowl and stuff, and that would have been Peyton Manning's first Super Bowl. They had to wait one more year. They still got their Super Bowl the next year, so I don't know. What do you think, Tim? Do you agree with that? Do you think Steeler fans? Is it just because we beat them all the time? They really, I mean, they really don't. It's one of those teams. Like there's just, I said this before. There's just certain teams in like certain sports that always beat other teams or always lose, and it seems like the Steelers always, like when it counts, they always beat the Colts.
Yeah, that's true, and that's a good call. If I wouldn't have thought to put the Indianapolis Colts on the list, but then when you like reel it off, some of the history and some of the guys, the Unitises, Peyton, Tony Dungy, like
even with Andrew Luck, it was
right,
still, yeah,
right, or even like some of the guys they have now, Jonathan Taylor, and yeah, you're right. It's an organization that you can root for, and like you said, usually run a pretty good organization compared to some of the other teams in the NFL. So yeah, that's a good underrated pick there.
All right, what's up for what's your next pick there, Tim?
I'm gonna go with Rip Hamilton, Richard Hamilton. So this is very similar to my Dalton pick because played for a team that I just absolutely despised. We played for that late '90s Connecticut basketball team who won a national championship. And I've talked about that on the show before, how I hated that UConn team so much, and Khalid Al-Amin and Calhoun and all those guys. But man, I always really liked watching Richard Hamilton play basketball. He was this 6'7" shooting guard, but he could play like forward as well. Very versatile. And he ended up playing for the Detroit Pistons in the NBA and winning a championship for them in 2004. So yeah, Richard Hamilton, again, guy for a team I hated, but guy that I had a lot of respect for and liked to watch.
I think I vaguely remember him for Detroit more than UConn. And that was that team with who was like Chauncey Billups and oh man, they had that big guy that could get rebounds on the Pistons too.
Yeah,
but
Ben Wallace.
Yeah, it's hard to believe they won like an NBA championship. Well, I guess it's almost 20 years now, but it doesn't seem that. I mean, it's 2004, almost 20 years. Wow, it's 18 years ago. Wow, that's hard to believe.
Yes.
So we're getting old here. Be that as it may, Richard Hamilton, a respected opponent. I'm gonna go with the Montreal Canadiens. Why do people say it like the Canadians? Like they say it weird. I don't know. Is that like
it's a Canada thing?
It's a French Canadian thing.
Probably.
Well, the Canadiens, they actually played the Penguins in their the Penguins' first ever game as an NHL team. Can you guess what the outcome of that game was, Tim? If you
like 1-0 or something.
2-1. The Canadians won. I don't know who was playing in 1968. I'm sure it was like a bunch of Hall of Famers still on Montreal's team there. The Canadians lead the series 124, 63, and 23. Because remember, we used to have lots of ties in hockey. The Canadians had also beaten the Penguins twice in the playoffs, 98 and 2010. They didn't count, like, because I got this from the Canadians website. Like, they didn't count that weird other one, like that COVID year. Was that technically not the playoffs, Tim's? Is that
I mean, that was the year they had like 24 teams and they had like a
So-
3-game opening round.
so they
I think
don't
that's
count that?
I don't know. To me, that's the playoffs.
On the Canadians website, they did not count that unless it
Interesting.
just hadn't been updated. I don't know.
Okay.
So I don't know. They beat us then too. So whatever. If they don't want to take credit for it, I can't help them. Some feud moments. I remember PK Subban injuring Jordan Staal. Do you remember that? Like he kind of like, I don't know if that was on purpose or, it's just like, I remember not kind of liking PK Subban after that. Like, it's like, I really wanted somebody to hit him, and I don't think everybody ever did. The good moments, well, the Penguins, I think they beat them in some regular season games every once in a while. I remember like one time they had to go up to Montreal and score 7 goals to win, which was pretty impressive because Carey Price was playing goalie and they put 7. I think they put a touchdown on him. So that was pretty wild. So why do we respect the Montreal Canadiens? I don't know. 24 Stanley Cups. They're an original 6 team. And I don't think their fans are jerks because, I mean, they are like, Canadians. Like, how much of a jerk? I mean, I guess you shouldn't say, because like Maple Leaf fans are really annoying. Like, I think Maple Leaf fans think they're the Canadians and they're not. It's like, this team is like way better than your team ever was. And I realize that neither of them have won a Stanley Cup since like 1993, but at least the Montreal has that over 67 for the Maple Leafs. So any arguments there, Tim?
No, you're right. It's a lot of history. Hard to disrespect them. There's not they haven't given you a lot of reasons to hate them, I guess. Right. And I've liked some of their players over the years. You mentioned like Carey Price, and there was Patrick Waugh, and they just had some. I almost put Mike Camilleri on my list. He was a guy that when we did lose to them that one year, I think you said 2010, he just I thought he destroyed us in the playoffs that year. And I was like, man, again, like, I wish that guy played for us. I just thought he was really good. So, yeah, that's a good pick.
All right. I think it's your turn. Is it your turn?
It is my turn. And I will stick with hockey, and I'm going to go with Craig Anderson.
There you go.
Veteran goaltender, still in the league, about to begin his 21st season in the NHL.
He's still, wow.
Yep.
Who's he playing for?
He is playing for
The Ottawa Senators still. He's going to retire an Ottawa Senator.
He's playing for the Buffalo Sabres.
Oh, well, that's barely an NHL hockey team.
So Craig Anderson, 21 years in the league, got lots of games versus the Penguins, obviously. Probably the most memorable was in 2017 when he carried what was a pretty mediocre Ottawa Senators team all the way to overtime of Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Penguins. And that was the year that Chris Kunitz got that puck past him that kind of fluttered over his shoulder. And it was like one of the great moments in Penguin history. But if you go back and watch that, you just see like his whole like face and shoulders drop. And I do remember feeling sorry for him in that moment because he just played his heart out in that series. And he had this really inspirational story that year because he and his wife had gone through a miscarriage. And then shortly after that, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. So, I mean, it's like, man, if they just weren't playing the Penguins, you just really would have been rooting for him to win a Stanley Cup. And they were literally one goal away from playing in the Stanley Cup Finals. So that's a guy I definitely had a lot of respect for. And yeah, still going strong after all these years.
he like carried that Senators team was not very good, and he
Right.
literally carried them to the overtime of the seventh game. So that's the breaks in hockey. It's like this great goalie brings you all this way, and it just a lucky shot by like an unlucky, like an not on, but like a not a guy really known for scoring goals. But that's how
Eh,
hockey goes. It's so weird how hockey always seems to work like that.
Yeah, we talked in our um, top Penguins playoff moments about that goal, and Kunitz was a goal scorer at one point, but by that point in his career, he was barely even on the ice. And it was just you're right. That's the way it goes in over double overtime of Game 7. He didn't get he really didn't get good wood on the puck, and it just kind of fluttered. Took this weird little kind of fluttering um, trajectory, and it just kind of went over his shoulder. And again, great moment for the Penguins. Super joyous moment for us as Penguin fans, but you did kind of feel for Craig Anderson after all he had been through. Just a tough way to end that season for him.
Can't disagree with you there. I think is that still the only. I think that's one of the only Canadian teams they've ever beaten in the playoffs too. I think it's the Senators.
Oh, that's a good trivia question. I mean, they've
Yeah.
beaten the Senators more than once, but
I don't think they've beaten any other Canadian. Not that there's like a ton of Canadian teams they would play in the playoffs. There'd only be two, right? Two or three.
Montreal and Toronto, they have never beaten for sure. And then you're right, a lot of the other ones
Ottawa.
are
And then the other teams are in the West. They would have
West,
to
yeah.
play them in a final. So
Yeah, good
yeah.
call.
Yeah. Well, moving on. Now this one might be controversial. There might be some people that disagree with me on this one, and I will defend this as much as I'll defend anything, I guess. That would be the Dallas Cowboys. How about them Cowboys, Tim? Um, so the background, the Cowboys actually lead the series 17-16. Boy, who knew that? That had to be that game with that big run at the end by what's his name, Zeke. Yeah, well, that's the decider right now. But the Steelers did beat them 2 out of 3 times in the Super Bowl. So, and like Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So, so what were some moments that were maybe more feudy? Hollywood Henderson insulting Terry Bradshaw. He said he couldn't spell cat if you spot on the C and the A. And I'm pretty sure Terry could spell cat. I don't know. I'm going out on a limb there. The good moments. I remember that 2009 regular season where we beat them. I think that was with Tony Romo through like an interception late in the game. And
Yeah, that was 08. That was the year we won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So it was 08. Yeah, that was a good time, right? I liked it. I don't remember the Super Bowls because I was either non-existent or like 1 year old. Were you alive for any of the Dallas Pittsburgh Super Bowls besides the one in 95?
Yeah, I guess I would have been alive for the one in 78, but again, would have been sucking on a pacifier watching it.
Be like, ooh, Dallas Cowboys. Terry can't spell cat. So what's up with the respect? They are, like, for better or worse, they are America's team. They probably have, I don't know who has a bigger, I think they have a pretty big fan base. So the Steelers have a very big fan base. The football team in Washington has a very large fan base. I would say, and the Giants do have a large fan. I don't know, like, if I was like handicapping the biggest fan bases in the National Football League, that would probably be my top 5. Maybe throw the Packers in too, but would be like what would you think? Washington, then probably Dallas, New York, then us in Green Bay.
Yeah,
That's probably your top 5. Yeah,
Patriots are up there too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, just because they're in a big market too, but I don't think they have the national appeal like Dallas and like that Washington team, man. That they're everywhere. Like they do have a very large fan base. I think also too, like having Roger Staubach, who was like kind of Captain America, and Tom Landry I always thought he was kind of classy. I've never heard anything to contradict that. And Tony Dorsett too, the homegrown kid there at the end, I'm sure helped us. I respect him. I don't know if the older fans, I know maybe the old timers not so much, but And they did win some other Super Bowls, so they weren't completely unsuccessful. So I don't know, is this like a Ravens Steelers kind of thing? Maybe not without the intensity as much. I don't know, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of the Cowboys. I always hated those Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith teams.
I didn't like the team, but I did like Aikman and Novacek.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Emmitt Smith wasn't horrible.
I always thought Troy Aikman was like very underrated as a quarterback. You're right. They've had some likable players over the years, and even recently they've had some. Like I don't hate Dak Prescott or Ezekiel Elliott or any of the guys they have now. I think it's more just the aura of America's team, and they put the hole in the stadium so God could look down on the star, and that's the kind of stuff that you just want to vomit when you hear. And I've said this.
I don't think like Tom Landry or Roger Staubach necessarily. I don't think. Yeah,
no, that's
maybe
fair.
It's like an Andy Dalton kind of situation where you respect the player more than maybe the team. I don't know.
That's fair. I mean, I think what puts it over the top for me, and I've said this in previous episodes, is their fans are just unbelievably obnoxious.
Yeah, they are.
And that's like.
But they're all over the place. Like, wasn't
Right.
Chris Christie, who's like the governor of New Jersey, has no connection to Texas, and he's a Cowboys fan.
Well, that's the way I have family members who grew up in places where there wasn't a football team, and they were Cowboy fans because that's the team that people picked, and that's the team people stuck with. So, I mean, that's kind of cool that they have that kind of appeal. I mean, you have to respect that. But just anytime, and again, they don't, not like they play in Pittsburgh very often, but anytime that they have, it's just they're just relentlessly annoying. So that's just been my experience, and maybe I don't have a large enough sample size. So you could say that, but I mean, Jerry
you go
Jones,
to the games and have to deal with their fans more than I do. I don't know. I don't know. I know. It seems like Cowboy fans sometimes are a little bit like front runners. You know what I mean? Like when they're not good, they disappear. It's like, oh, they're none around now. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jerry Jones. I mean, he's another guy. Wow. It's hard to have any respect for him. But you're right. A lot of tradition, a lot of definitely one of the marquee franchises in sports. So that's about all the good I'll say about them.
Well, like they say, if you don't have anything nice to say. All right, Tim, who's up next?
I'll stay with football and go with Kurt Warner. Now, Kurt Warner's we're talking about opponents of Pittsburgh sports teams. Kurt Warner literally only played against the Steelers twice in his entire career.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah,
wow.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But he did.
Well, one was a Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, one of them was, maybe the greatest game I would say definitely the greatest game in the history of the Steelers, arguably one of the greatest games in the history of the league.
And not such a great game for the Cardinals. Arizona, Chicago, or St. Louis.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was a big part of that. And he was a guy you just had to admire. He had that great story and always carried himself. And one of those guys that professed a lot about his faith and then backed it up with the way he acted and carried himself. So just really, really admired Kurt Warner, really admired Larry Fitzgerald. I didn't put him on that list because, he obviously played here. But just that team, again, another, just like Craig Anderson, it's like, man, you wanted to see them win, just not at our expense. Yeah. Like any other year, any other opponent, I would have been sitting there rooting my heart out for those guys, but it is the way it is.
Yeah, I saw his movie, and it is a good story, and like to see everything that he had to overcome and how it developed for him. And like I said, he's a really decent person and seems to like not walk the walk, and he says what he means. So moving on to a college football team, the Boston College Eagles. So Pitt's played them fairly frequently. Pitt actually leads the series 17-15, believe it or not. They first met in 1959, and Pitt actually won that one. Pitt lost them a couple times in the 70s, but then rattled off a bunch of victories between 72 and 81. Um, they had annual matchups from like 1985 to 2004. And BC, obviously, Pitt like sucked in the 90s. So BC like won a lot of those games. But they've only now played 3 times since 2004 because, they weren't in the same conference. They haven't been in the same division, but I think now they're going back to playing each other every year. So that's good. I remember the memorable game in 2004, and they played a game the other year. I've mentioned a couple times. They both went to overtime. The 2004 game was probably much more significant because Pitt needed that to win their share of a Big East title. So I always like their fans were always like decent, and I don't remember like their teams being like real like jerks or anything. Like I don't know, they always a good opponent and always like kind of classy, kind of like Notre Dame Junior, if that's a thing. Like maybe because they're a Catholic school. I don't know. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, that's another good underrated pick because it's really hard in terms of a team that your favorite team plays, in the same conference and has played regularly against for your whole lifetime. You really can't think of anybody that you hated there. I mean, even when Tom Coughlin was there,
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't that bad. Yeah.
right. You just never really hated anything about them. So yeah, it's a good pick.
Probably the most controversial moment is when they left for the Big East, like they left for the ACC, and I know Pitt wasn't too happy about that. And of course, Pitt losing on a missed extra point. But the better thing was Pitt. Tyler Palko ran over that BC safety, so yeah.
That was fun.
What are you gonna do? Oh, who's up next, Tim?
So I'll stick with the theme of picking guys off of hated rivals. I'm going to go with TJ Oshie. Obviously plays for the Washington Capitals. Lots of heated playoff moments against the Penguins over the years with TJ Oshie. And I think I really started liking him after he was the hero of that 2014 Olympics team whenever they played the Russians, and Dan Bylsma just kept sending him out there in the shootout over and over and over again. And he kept scoring over and over again to beat the Russians in Russia. So I remember his Wikipedia page the next day got updated and said TJ Oshie is an American hero. And and so ever since then, I've kind of been a TJ Oshie fan. And yeah, again, he plays for the Capitals, but I respect the guy. He plays hard. He's like Suggs. He's like a guy that I just would have always loved to have on our team. So I'm putting TJ Oshie on my list.
He's not quite a Jack Johnson, Captain America there, but
who is?
Yeah. Well, he's a Stanley Cup champion, so
he is. Good for him.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, and that was weird. Like that weird Olympic rule. I think they finally did change that because like Dan Bylsma kind of like abused the heck out of it, but that was a weird one. That was I forgot that was in Russia, so that was like in front of Putin and all that.
Yeah, Putin was. I believe he was there.
He had to be at the game. Yeah. I can't imagine he wasn't at the game. Yep. So
yeah, that was just that's one of those events that game, because it wasn't like for a gold medal or something.
Was it an elimination game, or was it just a pool game?
It was in it was in a pool, but I mean it mattered because it got them. I'm not sure the Russians even made it out of that.
Pool. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Because of that. I don't quote me on that, but every game is important because you only have a handful of them, and again that one being in Sochi and yeah, that was just beautiful. So I and then that was when he played for St. Louis. So then he signed with the Capitals, and I'm like, well, I can't start hating him just because he plays for the Capitals, right? So again, I still like TJ
Oshie. Going for like organizations that I want to hate this organization, and I just can't summon it for too very long, but that would be the St. Louis Cardinals of baseball, Tim, not of football, even though they were only there for like 5 years or 10 years. So there's no Neil Lomax or Roy Brown or Dan Dierdorf in this team, but lots of who is the shortstop? Ozzie
Smith,
it's Ozzie Smith, and I
Vince
don't know,
Coleman, Willie
yeah,
McGee,
yeah, all those like really good
John
players.
Tudor.
Yeah, Tudor. I remember Dad used to call him Tudor the turtle, and, and then who was there? Was Sparky Anderson wasn't there?
Whitey Herzog.
Right, that's who I'm thinking of. Yeah, yeah, Whitey Herzog, and I mean even Yadier Molina, and I mean they're all really really good players, and the Pirates actually, believe it or not, lead this series 1,071 to 1,016. I don't know how that's humanly possible, but it is. Moments that weren't so great. The Pirates losing to the Cardinals in the divisional round. I remember being like really upset. That Waka guy pitched a pretty good game, and Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole was decent, I think, in that, but they couldn't get past the Cardinals. I remember they beat the Pirates were beating them when in like 2013. I think they beat them in a series in the middle of the year. I remember like in extra innings. It was pretty good. Why do we respect them? Their fans are considered like the best in baseball, and their fans are generally like, that Midwest kind of nice people and not like total jerks. Heck, we've been National League rivals for like ever and ever. So it's just all in all like kind of a classy organization. I always thought like they're kind of the Pittsburgh Steelers of baseball. So they've won a lot of World Series. They always seem to go like they're never like horrible. They're never god awful. So, and they're not Cubs fans, so they got that going for them.
Yeah, that's another good pick. I've always respected the Cardinals, and you talked about like the team they had when we were kids in the 80s, and then the team they have today. And you're right, it's just always good players, pretty much class players.
Pujols too, yeah, Albert Pujols, yeah,
right, right, yeah, definitely a franchise you just have to admire. All right, my next pick, I will go back to football and go with Steve McNair, the longtime Titans quarterback who used to just crush the Steelers. He was one of those guys that, he wasn't a tactician like a Peyton Manning, but he wasn't an amazing athlete like a Michael Vick, some of his peers in that era, but he was just gutsy, and he kind of did whatever it took to win a game. And the game I'll never forget is the 2000 game at Three Rivers Stadium that I was there for, where McNair, he had taken this really hard shot 2 weeks earlier against Kansas City, and he actually was in the hospital. He was in a hospital bed, and he told Jeff Fisher, the coach, he said, I'm done, I'm retiring. And like literally he was just going to quit playing because he couldn't do this anymore to his body. And somehow, some way, I don't know if I think his mother might have talked him out of it, but he rejoins the team for this game in Pittsburgh, but he's in no condition to play. He's on the bench. So they start our old buddy Neil O'Donnell, and the Steelers are beating O'Donnell and the Titans, but with like 2 minutes left, Jason Gilden crushes O'Donnell and he has to come out of the game. And they put McNair in. Again, guy was in a hospital bed. And McNair leads them on a 70-yard drive, which took 35 seconds and resulted in a touchdown, and they won the game.
You know what the Steelers' big mistake in that game was?
Hurting Neil O'Donnell.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was McNair though. Like that was what he was just a winner. And it, I say that and he never won a Super Bowl, but just the way he played was, again, he wasn't a stats guy, he wasn't a highlight reel guy, but I don't know. To me, I always had a lot of respect for him. I was sad when he passed away so tragically.
Yeah, he's a tough guy, and just that old school kind of NFL. Like he could have played in any era. I remember him in college at Alcorn State, believe it or not. And I just remember people talking about it. I don't think they had any of their games on TV. So, and I don't think he ever won a championship in college either. But he was really good in college, and he was pretty good in the pros too. I mean, he came within like literally a foot of almost, at least tying the Super Bowl. But I don't know. It's a shame the way things. He was he was another. He just probably like he took such a beating. You wonder like what he would have done in this like era of football where you're not allowed to touch the quarterback. It would have been interesting to see a guy like him play nowadays. Going back to, we're sticking with football, but this time it's a team, and it would be the Naval Academy. And I don't know if Pitt ever plays them in basketball. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't ever remember them playing them, but so we're just going to stick to football on this one. Pitt actually leads the series 23-14-3. Their last meeting was in the Armed Forces Bowl, which Pitt lost 44-23. Hey, I was there. I witnessed it. I lived it. Some moments that were kind of interesting. In 1963, Pitt and Navy, they were the top two teams in the country. Navy actually went on to play Texas for the national championship in the Cotton Bowl. They actually lost. Pitt had one of their better teams, but that was the no bowl year, even though they had 9 wins because of the Kennedy assassination. I guess they didn't play for 2 weeks, so they didn't get invited. They thought they would have beaten Navy, but there was some coach on the sideline who helped scout Pitt. His name was Steve Belichick. So that would be Bill Belichick's father. So I guess, he had a detailed scouting report. So that helped. Staubach said that really helped him beat Pitt that year. Staubach and his teammates from that game, 7 guys who played in that 1963 game became admirals in the Navy. And actually, some of them died in Vietnam. So it's pretty wild that that's all happened. And it's just, some moments, the fade pass game, that was definitely a bad moment for Pitt. Instead of running LaShawn McCoy, it went to overtime and Pitt had scored and they were going for 2 to finally beat Navy because they couldn't stop the Navy option that day. That was was that a Chris? No, that was a Wannstedt team. And so they threw a fade pass to was it Jonathan Baldwin? Or one of the receivers, and he dropped it. So I remember Tim really liked that call. He was really in favor of the fade pass. Instead of giving it to LaShawn McCoy. Yeah. They had LaShawn McCoy who Navy really hadn't stopped much. So the good moments, Pitt pretty regularly beat them besides the bowl game and the stupid fade pass game. So why do we respect the Naval Academy, Tim? This is a pretty easy one to see why they're a respected opponent. I do not think I've gone to enough Pitt games and I've gone to more than one Pitt Navy game. I don't think I've ever heard anybody boo them. And if they did, it was very minor because I don't know about you, Tim, and I don't know about our listeners, but I'm not going to boo an officer in the Navy because that's what those guys are. When they graduate Annapolis, they're going to be naval officers. So why would I do that? I realize they're an opponent and I hope we beat them every year. I don't want to lose to them, but I'm not going to freaking boo them. And plus their fans are classy because all of them are either in the military or graduated the military. And, except for, the guys in the Army, you don't like the Navy, but that's a whole different rivalry. But I just one of those opponents I always respected. I always liked when Pitt played them. I know my dad always liked when Pitt played them. I know they're not always the greatest team, but I just think it's one of those teams that Pitt should just always play every year. So
yeah, well said. Can't hate on Naval Academy, right? So yeah, that's a really good pick.
Ooh, naval officer. I hope you drown. It's come on, grow up.
I mean, there was a time when that kind of stuff, back in the Vietnam kind of era.
Yeah, that's
where that
for
might
sure.
have been or probably was happening. But you're right. That feels like that's so far in the past now. I'm sure that the folks that served
I
back
don't
then
I don't
remember it,
think
but
people can even relate. Like the younger generation can even relate to that.
mhm.
Like, because the Gulf War changed all. I remember that growing up, even because my dad's a Vietnam veteran. I remember growing up, they didn't talk about it in public. Like him and his friends that were veterans would talk about, but nobody else. You would never. Yeah, it just was swept under the rug until the Gulf War, and then that seemed to change all that. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah.
I have a family member who was in the Navy a little bit after Vietnam, like the early 80s. And he talked about how they would make sure they changed into civilian clothes when they were out at port somewhere. Like they just, it wasn't a popular thing to be in the military. And now they march them out at football games and everything, as they should, right? But that's very different than it was 40 years ago. And it's like you said, it's hard to relate to that or even remember that. So, and it's good.
Remember it. I remember just because my father was a veteran, but I don't think like my kids could relate to that. So
Mhm.
again, it's definitely for the better, for the better. So who do you got? Who do you got next, Tim?
I'm going to go with Nicholas Lidstrom, arguably the greatest defenseman in NHL history. He's a 7-time Norris Trophy winner. Obviously, a member of the Detroit Red Wings who played against the Penguins for many, many years, but also played against them in 2 consecutive Stanley Cup finals, one of which was won by Detroit, one was won by Pittsburgh. And, that whole team, I mostly had respect for, not the biggest fan of their coach, Mike Babcock at the time, but you know, Lidstrom was just the consummate leader of that team. Just a really good hockey player. Just you always feared him. Always consistent. Really couldn't say anything negative about him. So that's a guy who I just always respected, Nicholas Lidstrom.
Lindstrom, yeah, he always seemed to win the what's the award?
Norris.
Norris. Yeah, he always seemed to like. I don't even know how many times he won it, but
7 times if you would have paid attention to my early part of my thing where I actually said that.
7 times, huh? 7 times. Yeah, so he's a good player, and thank God he couldn't get that puck past Marc-Andre Fleury, or
Yes.
they would have been repeat Stanley Cup champions. So, and I need to pay attention better.
Steve
look,
just checks his email whenever I talk.
yeah, yeah.
I've always known this, but now it's verified.
Moving on to teams who may or may not be respected. The Cincinnati Reds. I don't know. This one might not be another one that people disagree with me on, at least. Believe it or not, there's another team that the Pirates lead the series over. I don't know why. I don't know how. Well, I know why, but I don't know how. I guess they beat them enough. So they played each other for like I don't not sure, but it probably I would say the 18th century, but not the 18th century. Yeah, they're playing in the French and Indian War, Steve. The 19th century, those would be the 1800s. So I I don't know if they were the Cincinnati Red Stockings or whatever they were back then, but some moments that weren't so the great Doc Ellis. Does anybody remember Doc Ellis beating the first 4 batters in the lineup? He just like went out there and was like, I'm just gonna start beating people. Doc was a wild one. There was that also in 2019 that Reds pitcher like tried to fight the whole Pirates team for some reason. I forget why he was ticked off. The good times, the Pirates beating them in the wild card, the infamous Cueto game. I think we did a whole podcast on that if I remember correctly. And why they were respected. Well, the Reds are just always really good in the 70s. And even that team that beat us in the 90s, like that team went wire to wire, and that team was really, really good. So I don't know. I can't. I know like sometimes I've had some jerk things, but like even like Barry Larkin was always kind of good, and Johnny Bench. I don't know. It's just hard to really hate too much on the Cincinnati Reds. Can you find any hate with the Cincinnati Reds there, Tim?
No, I really can't. And like you said, just kind of a good history there as well. And a lot of players, you mentioned Barry Larkin. I was thinking about that era of baseball when I just loved baseball so much. And I remember all my favorite players were usually American League players. Like I like Griffey and Frank Thomas and Ricky Henderson, like guys like that, because they played in the American League and they didn't ever play against the Pirates. But Barry Larkin was one of the guys I just always really liked, even though he played against the Pirates all the time. So, and even the guys like in recent years, yeah, just a, I don't know, just a good team and hard to hate. You're right.
Yeah, there was their third baseman too. I can't remember Tom. I can't remember his name, but he was really good too. It always seemed like a classy guy. So, who do you got next, Tim?
I'll go with Joe Montana. Joe Cool.
Joe Montana? Oh no, that's
No, not him. We'll say that for the most respected actors list. Yeah, Joe Montana, all-time great quarterback, arguably the GOAT, although Tom Brady's kind of taken that title away from him in recent years. But Montana, playing most of his career for the 49ers, didn't have a ton of games against the Steelers, but did have some pretty big games against them. Did beat them in a playoff game when he played for the Kansas City Chiefs, where he came from behind and converted like a clutch fourth down play and then beat us in overtime.
That was the infamous block punt.
Yeah, it was the block punt game. But
and the guy kicked the guy in the head,
DJ Johnson kicked their tight end in the head and got thrown out. Yeah, we talked about that in our blunders episode. But again, Joe Montana, just one of my favorite players as a kid, especially in the 80s when the Steelers stunk. And when you're a kid, you root for your home team, but then you latch on to other guys because your team stinks. And Joe Montana was just always one of those guys I really loved to watch, and just a great quarterback, and not a guy that was a guy that carried himself pretty well on and off the field. So Joe Montana, definitely a guy I had a lot of respect for.
Yeah, I remember him doing like pregame stuff too. Like it wasn't like in the 90s, like on NBC, he did like pregame stuff
for a while. His personality was not really cut out to do TV. He was
because he's so like because I remember that was when like the zone blitz was big, and he was like all like, okay, everybody calm down. It's just another thing, and offenses will adjust to it. And like nobody wanted to hear everybody wanted hyperbole. Nobody will ever adjust it. The league should make a rule against it. It's like, okay, whatever, just like Joe was just being a reasonable person. So and maybe that's why he's respected so much. So.
Well, that was kind of his personality. I mean, the John Candy story, if you're not familiar with that, they were playing the Bengals in Super Bowl 23. They had to go, I want to say like 90 yards to win the game. So they're like at their own 10-yard line, and they're in the huddle, and everybody's, nervous because this is the whole season on the line. And Joe Montana goes, "Hey, is that John Candy in the stands over there? I think that's John Candy." And like the offensive linemen are like, "Are you kidding? Who cares? Like we have to, like we're literally, the whole season comes down to this one drive." And he's just like, "Wow, there's a celebrity over there," And that was kind of his personality, and that's why, like you said, Steve, he was kind of just like that on TV as well. Like, oh, whatever. He wasn't a soundbite kind of guy, which is probably why he didn't last very long. He also had a very famous episode of Saturday Night Live that he hosted, and I won't repeat the famous line that he had because it's not safe for work, but go look it up, because it was just, they got him to just say this like punchline of a skit that was just so un-Joe Montana like. But yeah, I'm a big Joe Montana fan.
Nice. Joe Cool, can't beat him. Ringgold's old too. He's a Western Pennsylvania guy.
That's right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, good call.
So, all right. Going back to football, the foosballs. That would be the Syracuse Orange, and they're not orange men or orange women. They're just orange. We're being very gender neutral here. So those oranges sure like, and I just went with football, though. They have a pretty good rivalry against basketball. I didn't look up the basketball stats. The all-time series, 42 and 32 and 3 ties. That's fun. So Pitt actually leads the all-time series. Once again, I'm not sure like how like Pitt football and the Pirates lead some of these all-time series, but hey, that's going on. So the first time these teams met was in 1916, which is kind of insane. Pitt won. That's wild. That's like World War One. Wow, that's over 100 years.
Fun fact, that was also the same year that they hired Jim Boeheim to coach their basketball team.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, hey, you, I'm fresh off the boat. No, actually, I don't think we were even in the war yet. Were we? No, I don't think the United States was even in the war yet. The last meeting was 22 and Pitt won 31-14. Pitt and Syracuse, they have about 77 times. They played every single season since 1955, so that's grandparents for most of us.
Wow, really? Is
Yeah.
that they've played every single year since 1955?
Yep.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So like your grandparents were watching Syracuse and Pitt play if they could, or listening to them on the radio, maybe, or not giving a crap because my parents didn't live in Pittsburgh. So, actually, you know, a fun fact, Kenny Pickett, the current first round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers, has never lost a game against the Qs. So he won all three of his starts. So what are you gonna do? The feud moments, the whining by the aforementioned Jim Boeheim about the refs during the golden years of Pitt basketball. Like, I think we covered that too in the Pitt basketball podcast. Like, he was like, "Oh, they're really good at fouling and playing physical." Like he tried to like make it like he wasn't complaining about the refs. Like, he was like, "Oh, you know, if they're not going to call that, that's really good defense by Pitt." You know, while like complaining about the officials. So. Another not fun moment was losing in the Carrier Dome for like 30 years. So I'm not sure if they ever have they blown that up yet, Tim? Nah, probably not.
Nope, not yet.
Troy Nunes. Do I need to say anything else besides the words
Move
Troy Nunes? Who's actually like a pretty decent guy. He like, you know, the good beating Syracuse in overtime in 2018. That was pretty cool. I think I remember I was down. I actually moved. That game got delayed by rain, and I moved down to like the really good seats, and like they had a nice interception at the end. Jamie Dixon, remember he owned Syracuse for years. Like they just beat Syracuse every year in basketball when Jamie Dixon was coaching. And I remember like we lost in the Carrier Dome in football for like 30 years, like from like 1980 to like 2000. And like Larry Fitzgerald and Roth Rutherford just like totally put that place to bed. They put 56 points on the Orange in 2002. That was kind of awesome. Why they respective. I never thought their fans were complete jerks. Even Tim Benz, you know, it's always fun to call him like, "Oh, you're from Syracuse," but he's actually not that bad. Even though he's from Boston and Syracuse, it's double whammy. They're a long time rivalry, but they never reached like jerk level like West Virginia or like Penn State fans. So I'm not sure, but it's always fun to play them, and they're always a fun opponent. Any quarrel with that one, Tim? You can't stand Troy Nunes so much that you don't respect them at all?
No, I mean,
go back to Butler, Troy Nunes.
No, and I have nothing against Troy Nunes. That game was just the worst. but yeah, no, they're a good program, and one that, again, like you said, it's funny that you can play your favorite team can play that other team so many times, but you really don't have anything real negative to say about them, and in two sports, right? Yeah. So I think that says a lot about the university and the programs that they run. So yeah, good pick.
Do you have anything left? Do you have anybody left?
That's my list.
You're fresh. That's the list. You're fresh out.
I'm fresh out.
So, I hope you respect our list of people and teams. So
if you did there,
yeah. If you don't respect it, feel free to comment on our Twitter page or email us. And check out our website. Pittsburgh Sports Memories. That's still Weebly.com. So thanks for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure you click a like so other people can find us, and word of mouth. It's always great too. We all appreciate all our listeners, and thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.